For 7 years, I visited my comatose father-in-law every single day. Then my husband left, and David woke up, whispering words that turned my marriage into a crime scene. The silence in the house was deafening. It was a thick, heavy quiet, the kind that presses in on you after someone you love has just walked out the door. My husband, Mark, had just left for his 2-week mental health vacation. A boy's trip to some remote cabin in the mountains with no cell service, no Wi-Fi, just fishing, hiking, and, I quote, a whole lot of nothing. He'd said he needed it, that the last 7 years had been a pressure cooker and the lid was about to blow. I understood. I really did. So I'd packed his bags, kissed him goodbye at the door, and told him to forget everything and just breathe. But as I watched his truck disappear down the street, a cold knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I was alone. Truly alone for the first time in a very long time. You see, for the past 7 years our lives have revolved around one person, my father-in-law David. 7 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, his car had hydroplaned on the interstate. The accident was catastrophic. He'd survived, technically, but the man we knew was gone. He was left in a persistent vegetative state. A coma from which the doctors said he would likely never emerge. And for 2,555 days, they were right. Mark and I had been married for just a year when it happened. David had been the pillar of the family. A big, booming presence with a laugh that could shake a room and an opinion on everything. He was a force of nature. Seeing him lying in that hospital bed, perfectly still except for the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, was like looking at a mountain that had been hollowed out from the inside. It broke something in Mark, something I'm not sure ever fully healed. My mother-in-law Carol was devastated. She tried to be strong, but after the first year, she just couldn't bear the daily visits anymore. The sight of her vibrant husband reduced to a shell, kept alive by tubes and machines, was a form of torture she couldn't endure. So the responsibility, the vigil, fell to me. Mark went, of course, but his visits were short, strained. He'd stand awkwardly by the bed, stare at his father's face, and leave looking 10 years older. He said it felt like visiting a ghost. But I went. Every single day. I'd finish my work as a freelance graphic designer, drive the 20 minutes to the long-term care facility, and sit with David for an hour. The nurses all knew me. They'd greet me with sad, sympathetic smiles. "He's had a quiet day, Sarah," they'd say, and I'd nod and thank them. I'd sit in the stiff visitor's chair, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and floor polish, and I'd talk to him. I'd tell him about my day, about the funny thing our cat did, about a new client I'd landed. I'd read him the news from the paper, focusing on the sports section because he'd always loved baseball. Sometimes I'd just hold his hand, its skin papery and cool, and watch the steady green line on the heart monitor. It was the soundtrack to the last 7 years of my marriage. Beep, beep, beep. A constant, monotonous reminder of what we had lost. Mark told me I didn't have to do it. "He doesn't know you're there, Sarah," he'd say, his voice heavy with a mix of gratitude and guilt. "You're torturing yourself." But I couldn't stop. It felt like a duty, a promise I had silently made to the man who had welcomed me into his family with such warmth. And maybe, a small selfish part of me felt that if I was the one who was always there, if I was the constant, then maybe, just maybe, something good would happen. It was a foolish, desperate hope, one I barely admitted to myself. So, with Mark gone, the silence in the house felt like a void. The routine was broken. I wandered from room to room, the knot in my stomach twisting tighter. I decided I couldn't just sit here. I had to go see David. It was the only thing that felt normal. The drive to the facility was automatic. My car knew the way by heart. I parked in my usual spot and walked through the sliding glass doors, the familiar scent of sterility washing over me. "Hi, Sarah," said Brenda, the afternoon nurse, without even looking up from her chart. "He's the same." "Thanks, Brenda. I replied, my voice a little too bright. I walked down the quiet, polished hall to room 214. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dim, the only light coming from the late afternoon sun filtering through the blinds, casting long stripes across the floor. And there he was, my father-in-law David, lying in the bed, exactly as I had left him yesterday, and the day before that, and every day for the last 7 years. The rhythmic beep of the monitor filled the space. Beep, beep, beep. I pulled the chair closer to his bed and sat down. "Hey, David," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It's me, Sarah." I reached out and took his hand. It felt the same as always. "Well, Mark's finally done it. He's gone on that trip with his buddies. Left this morning. The house is so quiet without him. I almost don't know what to do with myself." I laughed, a small, sad sound. He needed this, though. He's been so wound up. I hope he can finally relax. I told him not to worry about a thing. I kept talking, rambling on about nothing in particular, my voice a low murmur against the steady beeping of the machine. I squeezed his hand gently, a habit I'd formed over the years. Usually there was no response. His hand would just lie limply in mine. But not today. Today I felt a flicker. I stopped talking, my breath catching in my throat. It was so faint. I thought I must have imagined it. A tiny, almost imperceptible pressure against my palm. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I stared at his hand, then at his face. His eyelids were still closed. His expression was slack. Nothing had changed. It was my imagination. Grief playing tricks on me. I took a shaky breath and was about to start talking again when it happened. His fingers, the ones wrapped around mine, tightened. It wasn't a twitch or a spasm. It was a grip, and weak, fragile, but unmistakable. My own hand went cold. I couldn't breathe. I stared, mesmerized, at our joined hands. Then I slowly lifted my gaze to his face. His eyelids were fluttering. Not just fluttering. They were struggling to open. A low sound escaped his throat. A dry, rasping noise like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was the first sound he had made in 7 years. "David?" I whispered, my voice trembling so hard I could barely form the word. "David, can you hear me?" His eyes, cloudy and unfocused, cracked open. They darted around the room for a moment before landing on my face. There was a flicker of something in them. Confusion. Fear. And then, recognition. His lips, chapped and pale, parted. He tried to speak again. Another dry, guttural sound. He swallowed, a painful, deliberate effort. And then he spoke. His voice was a bare, hoarse whisper. A ghost of the booming baritone it once was. He said one word, a name, not his wife's, not his son's. He said my name. "Sarah." Tears welled in my eyes, blurring his face. "Yes. David, yes, it's me. You're awake. Oh my God, you're awake." I fumbled for the call button, my hand shaking uncontrollably. His grip on my hand tightened with surprising strength, stopping me. He shook his head, a tiny jerky movement. His eyes were wide now, locked on mine, and the fear in them was sharp and clear. He licked his lips again, struggling to form the words, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He rasped, his voice cracking. "He did this." I stared at him, my mind reeling, unable to process what he was saying. "Who, David? Who did what? The doctors? The accident?" He shook his head again, more insistently this time. His eyes burned into mine, filled with a desperate, frantic urgency. He took another ragged breath, and the next two words he whispered shattered my entire world. Mark pushed. The two words hung in the air, thick and poisonous, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Mark pushed. My mind short-circuited. It was like hearing a sentence in a language I'd never heard before. The sounds were there, but the meaning was impossible, nonsensical. Mark? My Mark? The man who cried watching animal rescue videos? The man who spent 7 years grieving, his life shadowed by this single tragic event? It couldn't be. David, I stammered, my voice a strangled whisper. You're confused. The accident. It was the rain. The car. His eyes, those pale, watery eyes that had been vacant for so long, held mine with a terrifying lucidity. The fear was still there, but underneath it was a bedrock of certainty. He tried to speak again, but the effort was too much. A wave of exhaustion washed over his face, his eyelids fluttering closed. His grip on my hand slackened, and his head lolled to the side. The steady beep of the monitor, which had seemed so loud just a moment ago, now felt like a whisper in the roaring hurricane of my thoughts. It was in that moment of stunned silence that the door flew open. Brenda, the nurse, rushed in, a look of harried concern on her face. Sarah, I'm sorry. I was just checking the... Oh my God! She stopped dead, her eyes wide as she saw David. His eyes were closed again. But something was different. The slackness was gone. There was a tension in his face, a flicker of life that hadn't been there a minute ago. She rushed to the other side of the bed, her professional calm kicking in. Dr. Evans to room 214, stat! She barked into the intercom on the wall. Within seconds, the room was a whirlwind of activity. Doctors and nurses flooded in. A controlled chaos of stethoscopes, flashing pen lights, and urgent questions I couldn't answer. They gently but firmly moved me out of the way, my hand slipping from David's. I stumbled back against the wall, a ghost in the corner of the room watching them work. Pupils are reactive. David, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me. Vitals are stable, but he's unresponsive again. They were talking about a miracle. The word echoed around the small room, bouncing off the walls and hitting me like a physical blow. A miracle. 7 years in a coma, and he wakes up. It was what I had prayed for, hoped for, sat vigil for every single day. I should have been weeping with joy, calling Mark's mother, shouting from the rooftops, but all I could feel was a cold, creeping dread that started in my stomach and spread through my veins like ice. All I could hear was that terrible, rasping whisper. Mark. Pushed. I was eventually ushered out of the room and into the hallway. Brenda came out a few minutes later, her face flushed with excitement. Sarah, this is incredible. We've never seen anything like it. He's lapsed back into a deep sleep, but the brain activity... It's there. He was awake. Did he say anything to you? My heart stopped. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. What could I say? Yes. He woke up just long enough to accuse my husband of attempted murder? The word sounded insane even in my own head. This was a man who had suffered a catastrophic brain injury. He was confused. He had to be. To say anything else, to voice this monstrous accusation, would be cruel. It would taint this miracle, turn it into something ugly and dark. And it would destroy my husband. No, I finally managed to say, the lie feeling like sandpaper in my throat. He squeezed my hand and opened his eyes. He just looked at me. Brenda's sympathetic smile returned. Of course. That's more than enough. It's everything. She patted my arm. You should go home and get some rest. We'll call you with any changes. This is the best news. The drive home was a blur. The world outside my windshield seemed distant and out of focus. My hands were clamped to the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My brain was a war zone. One side, the logical side, the side that loved my husband, was screaming that David was brain damaged. It was a phantom memory, a coma-induced nightmare that had surfaced upon waking. The trauma of the accident had scrambled his memories, created a villain where there was only a tragic twist of fate. But the other side of my brain, the cold, terrified part, couldn't shake the look in David's eyes. It wasn't confusion. It was pure, unadulterated terror, and it was directed at the memory of his son. I started replaying the last 7 years in my head. But now, everything was seen through a new, horrifying filter. Mark's profound grief. Or was it guilt? His refusal to talk about the details of the accident, always saying it was too painful. His strained, brief visits to his father's bedside. He'd always said he couldn't stand to see him like that. But what if he couldn't stand to face what he had done? And the trip. This sudden urgent need to get away to a place with no cell service, no connection to the world. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. It was as if he knew, somehow, that the clock was running out, that the secret he'd been carrying for 7 years was about to wake up. I pulled into our driveway, the house looking exactly the same as it had when I'd left a few hours ago, but it felt different, alien. The silence I'd lamented before now felt sinister, full of unspoken things. I walked through the door and stood in the entryway, my bag dropping to the floor with a thud. I was standing in a crime scene. A 7-year-old crime scene, and I had been living with the perpetrator, sleeping next to him, loving him, comforting him for his grief. The thought made me physically ill. I ran to the kitchen sink and retched, my body trembling. This was insane. I was letting the confused words of a sick man poison my mind. I loved Mark. I knew him. He wasn't capable of this. But I had to know. My mind raced. Proof. I needed something, anything to either confirm this nightmare or dispel it forever. Where would I even look? His phone was with him. His main laptop, too. I walked through the quiet house, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I ended up in front of his office, a room that was his sanctuary. I rarely went in there. It was filled with his things, his scent, his life. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. It was neat, organized just like Mark. Bookshelves lined one wall. A large oak desk sat in the center. Everything was in its place. I didn't know what I was looking for. A diary? A hidden letter? It all felt so cliché, so dramatic. I started opening drawers, bills, old pay stubs, office supplies. Nothing. I ran my hands along the bookshelves, pulling out random books and shaking them, feeling for anything hidden inside. Nothing. I was about to give up, to chalk it all up to my own hysteria, when I noticed the closet door. He used it for storage. Old electronics, boxes of files from his previous job. I opened it. It was dark and smelled faintly of dust and paper. On the top shelf, tucked away behind a box of old tax returns, was a laptop case. It wasn't his current one. This one was older. Bulkier. It was the one he'd had when we first got married. The one he'd replaced about 6 months after the accident, complaining it was slow and crashing all the time. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pulled a chair over, my hands shaking as I climbed up and retrieved the case. I brought it to his desk and unzipped it. The laptop was there, along with its power cord. I plugged it in and pressed the power button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low whir, the screen flickered to life. An old, pixelated logo appeared. It took a few minutes to boot up, the longest minutes of my life. Finally, the desktop appeared. It was cluttered with old icons and files, My eyes scanned the screen, my breath held tight in my chest. Most were work documents and old photos. And then I saw it. Tucked in the corner of the screen was a single video file. It wasn't the name of the file that made my blood run cold. It was the date it was created. The day before David's accident. The file was named simply for safekeeping. My finger hovered over the trackpad, a millimeter away from the icon. For safekeeping. The words were a quiet, ominous promise. A part of me, the part that still loved my husband and desperately wanted to believe in him, screamed at me to close the laptop, to throw it back in the closet, forget what David had said, and wait for Mark to come home so he could laugh this whole nightmare away. But the other part, the part that had seen the terror in his father's eyes, knew I had crossed a line. There was no going back to blissful ignorance. I had to know what was in that file. I took a deep, shuddering breath and double-clicked. The video player opened, and the screen went black for a second before an image flickered to life. It was shaky, clearly filmed on a phone, and the sound was muffled by the wind. The scene was a hiking trail, dense with trees and dappled with sunlight. 2 men were walking away from the camera. I recognized them instantly. It was Mark and his father, David. David was in the lead, his broad back to the camera, his familiar booming laugh echoing faintly. Mark was a few steps behind him, holding the phone that was recording. It looked like a normal family outing, a father and son enjoying a day in the mountains. They were talking about baseball, their voices rising and falling in a familiar, comfortable rhythm. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was just an old video, a memory. My paranoia had gotten the better of me. I was about to close the file, feeling foolish and ashamed, when the tone of the conversation shifted. "So Carol and I were thinking," David was saying, his voice clearer now as they paused near a scenic overlook. "Maybe we sell the big house, downsize, use the extra money to finally do some traveling, maybe help you and Sarah with a down payment on a bigger place." The camera, held by Mark, dipped slightly. His voice, when he spoke, was tight. "You're selling the house?" "Thinking about it," David said cheerfully, turning to face the camera, to face his son. He was smiling, his face tanned and healthy. It was a punch to the gut. Seeing him like that, so full of life. "It's too much for your mother to handle, and honestly, what do we need 5 bedrooms for? It's time to enjoy our retirement. Your inheritance will still be there, son. Don't you worry. Just a little less tied up in brick and mortar." He winked. "My inheritance," Mark repeated, his voice flat. There was an edge to it I'd never heard before. The camera was still focused on David, but I could feel the tension radiating from the man holding it. David's smile faltered. He seemed to sense the shift in mood. "Well, yes, eventually. The point is, we want to help you and Sarah now, get you started properly." "You mean you want to give it away?" Mark said. The camera shook slightly. "You want to take the money my grandparents built that business with, the money that's supposed to be mine, and piss it away on cruises and God knows what else." David's expression hardened. The cheerful father was gone, replaced by the formidable businessman I'd only heard stories about. "Now you listen to me. That money is mine and your mother's. We earned it. We decide what to do with it. It's not your money until we're dead and gone, and I plan on that being a long, long time from now. Your sense of entitlement is frankly sickening, Mark." The camera lurched violently, and for a second, the screen was just a blur of green and brown foliage. When it stabilized, it was pointed at the ground. I could hear their voices, sharp and angry. "Entitlement? I've worked for you for 10 years. I put my life on hold, waiting for you to retire, waiting for my chance to run the company." Mark's voice was venomous. "Run it into the ground, you mean?" David shot back. "You don't have the head for it. Son, you're impatient. You make rash decisions. That deal you tried to push through last month almost cost us a fortune. I can't hand my life's work over to you. Not yet. Maybe not ever." There was a sound of scuffling, of feet on gravel. The camera jerked up again, and this time both men were in the frame. It looked like Mark had propped the phone against a rock or a tree. They were standing at the edge of the overlook. Beyond them, the ground dropped away into a steep, rocky ravine. They were face to face, shouting now, their words lost to the wind and the poor audio quality. But their body language was clear. David was jabbing a finger into Mark's chest. Mark's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. My blood ran cold. I knew this path. It was part of the state park system just outside of town. The day of the accident. It hadn't been a hydroplaning incident on the interstate. That was a lie. The initial report, a fall. The police had ruled it an accident. David had slipped while hiking, alone, and fallen. Down the ravine. The car crash story had come later, concocted by Mark and Carol. They'd told everyone, including me, that the trauma of the fall was too much to talk about. So they'd created a simpler, less personal story for public consumption. It made sense at the time. A way to protect their privacy. But now, it was a cover-up. I watched, my heart in my throat, as the argument on the screen reached its climax. David turned his back in disgust, ready to walk away. And in that split second, I saw my husband, my gentle, kind Mark, lunge forward. It wasn't a clumsy stumble. It was a deliberate, two-handed shove, delivered with all his weight and all his rage. David's arms pinwheeled. A look of pure shock and betrayal flashed across his face as he tumbled backward over the edge. There was no scream. Just the sickening sound of his body crashing through the undergrowth, followed by an awful, final thud. The video kept recording. Mark stood there, panting, staring at the empty space where his father had been just a second before. He ran a hand through his hair, his face a mask of disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend what he had just done. Then, a slow, horrifying smile spread across his lips. It was a look of triumph, of release. My own scream was a strangled gasp. I slammed the laptop shut, shoving it away from me as if it were radioactive. The image of that smile was burned onto the back of my eyelids. That was the face of a monster. A monster I had married. My mind was a chaotic storm. I had to call the police. I had to show them the video. But what then? Mark would be arrested, sent to prison for the rest of his life. My life, the life I had built, would be utterly destroyed. And what about Carol? This would kill her. And David, he was awake. He knew. My first loyalty had to be to him. To the truth. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slipping on the screen. I needed to call someone, but who? Brenda at the hospital? 911. As my thumb hovered over the emergency call button, my phone buzzed in my hand. A text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. My hand shook as I opened it. The message contained just 2 words, but they froze the blood in my veins and stopped my breath in my chest. It was a message that made no sense and every sense at the same time. A message that told me this conspiracy, this nightmare, was far bigger and more terrifying than I could ever have imagined. The message read, "He knows. He knows." The 2 words on my phone screen seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Who was he? Who knew? My mind, already reeling from the Sarah video, struggled to make sense of the message. My first panicked thought was that it was from Mark. That somehow, from his remote cabin with no service, he knew that I had found the laptop, that I had seen what he did. But that was impossible. The text was from an unknown number. This was someone else. Someone who knew about the video. Someone who was watching me. A cold wave of fear washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. I stumbled back from the desk, my eyes darting around the empty room. Was someone outside? Were they in the house? The silence, which had once felt sinister, was now actively menacing. Every creak of the old house settling, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sounded like a footstep, a threat. I ran to the front door and threw the deadbolt, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I did the same to the back door, then raced through the house, checking every window, pulling every blind. The house was secure, but I didn't feel safe. I felt trapped. The laptop on Mark's desk felt like a ticking bomb. It was evidence, proof, the key to everything. But the text message was a clear warning. Someone else was involved. Someone who had an interest in keeping this secret buried. My mind raced through the possibilities. Who could have sent it? Who else knew? The answer came to me with a sickening lurch of realization. Carol. Mark's mother. The grieving wife who couldn't bear to visit her husband's bedside. I replayed the last 7 years in my mind. Her initial public devastation had slowly given way to a quiet, resigned acceptance. But there were inconsistencies, things that had seemed odd at the time but that I had dismissed. The way she would change the subject whenever I brought up the specifics of the accident, her insistence on handling all of David's financial affairs herself, shutting Mark out completely, and the car crash story. They had concocted it together. She had to know. She had helped him cover it up. The thought of Carol, a woman I had looked to as a second mother, being a part of this was almost as devastating as Mark's betrayal. They had built their lives on this mountain of lies, and I had been living obliviously on top of it. My phone buzzed again. The same unknown number. This time, it was a picture message. My hand trembled so badly I almost dropped the phone. With a deep breath, I opened it. It was a photo of the long-term care facility, David's hospital, but it was taken from a distance, from the parking lot, and it was a live photo, taken just moments ago. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it. My blood turned to ice. They weren't just watching me. They were watching him. The message wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. We know you know. And we know where he is. They were telling me that if I went to the police, if I exposed them, David would be in danger. He was helpless, vulnerable, kept alive by machines they could easily unplug. My one piece of leverage, my one witness, was a sitting duck. I felt a surge of adrenaline-fueled rage cut through my fear. They were not going to get away with this. They were not going to hurt David again. I had to get to him. I had to protect him. I grabbed my car keys and the laptop, stuffing it into its case. I was going to the hospital, and I was not leaving his side. I would show the video to the head nurse, to the hospital security, to anyone who would listen. I would not let them silence him. The drive to the hospital was a frantic 10-minute blur. I broke every speed limit, my eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror, convinced I was being followed. Every pair of headlights felt like a threat. I pulled into the hospital parking lot, my tires screeching, and parked as close to the entrance as I could. I clutched the laptop case to my chest like a shield and ran inside. The fluorescent lights of the lobby felt harsh and sterile. I raced to the elevators, my heart pounding in my ears. As the doors slid open on the second floor, I saw Brenda at the nurse's station, her back to me, talking on the phone. I didn't stop. I ran down the polished hall towards room 214. But as I got closer, I saw that something was wrong. The door to his room was wide open, and there was a flurry of activity inside. The calm, controlled chaos from earlier was gone. This was different. This was panic. I heard a nurse shout, "Get the crash cart!" And my legs almost gave out from under me. I pushed my way into the room, past a junior nurse who tried to stop me. "Ma'am, You can't be in here." I ignored her. The scene inside was my worst nightmare. David was in the bed, his body convulsing. The heart monitor, the one that had provided the steady soundtrack to my life for 7 years, was now screaming a single, flat, continuous tone. A doctor was performing chest compressions, his face grim with effort. "He's in V-fib! Charged 200, another nurse yelled. And standing in the corner of the room, her hand pressed to her mouth in a perfect pantomime of shock and grief, was Carol. Our eyes met across the chaotic room. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but there was no surprise in them. There was no grief. There was only a cold, hard glint of triumph. She had done this. She had gotten to him first. The text message wasn't just a threat. It was a distraction, a way to get me out of the house while she came here to finish what her son had started 7 years ago. The doctor shouted, "Quote 3," and David's body arched off the bed as the defibrillator paddles delivered a jolt of electricity. The flat line on the monitor blipped, tried to find a rhythm, and then settled back into that horrifying, unending tone. "No response," the doctor said, resuming compressions, pushing one of epi. I was frozen, the laptop case slipping from my numb fingers and clattering to the floor. It was over. I was too late. I had failed him. Carol took a small step towards me, a faint, cruel smile touching her lips. She thought she had won. She thought she had silenced the only witness, destroyed the only person who could corroborate the story on the laptop. But as the medical team worked frantically, their efforts becoming more and more futile, my despair began to curdle into a hard, cold resolve. She hadn't won, because she had made one critical mistake. She thought David was the only witness. She thought the secret had died with him. She didn't know about the video. And I realized in that moment, as the doctor finally called the time of death, and a heavy silence fell over the room, that she had just signed her own son's death warrant. Because now, there was nothing holding me back. No vulnerable patient to protect. No reason to hold on to a shred of hope for my old life. There was only the truth, ugly and raw, and a promise I was now making to a dead man. I would not let them get away with this. I bent down and picked up the laptop, my movements calm and deliberate. I met Carol's gaze again, letting her see the promise in my eyes. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. I turned and walked out of the room, my purpose clear. I was going to the police. I made it to the elevator, my mind a blank slate of grief and determination. The doors opened, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. The doors started to slide shut, and just before they closed, a hand shot through the gap, forcing them open again. A man in a dark suit stepped into the elevator with me. He wasn't a doctor or a hospital employee. He looked at me, his eyes cold and empty, and then his gaze dropped to the laptop case in my hand. He pressed the button for the basement parking garage, his knuckles brushing against the emergency stop button. "Quote 6, he said, his voice low and even. "Quote 7. He looked up and a small, professional smile touched his lips. "Quote 8. The elevator descended with a smooth, silent hum that felt completely at odds with the frantic drumming of my own heart. The air grew thick and cold. I was trapped in a small, sterile box with a man whose presence screamed danger. He wasn't big or physically imposing, but he had an air of unnerving stillness, the kind predators have right before they strike. His suit was expensive, his shoes were polished, and his eyes were utterly devoid of emotion. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice coming out as a shaky whisper. I hugged the laptop case tighter to my chest. It felt both like a shield and a terrible liability. He didn't answer right away. He just watched me, that small, chilling smile never leaving his lips. The elevator passed the lobby level, continuing its descent into the bowels of the hospital, the basement, where the morgue was. A fresh wave of nausea and grief washed over me as I thought of David, of his body being wheeled down to that cold, sterile place. "Let's not play games, Sarah," the man said, his voice soft but laced with steel. "It's been a very long day for everyone. My client is distraught. She just lost her husband, for the second time, you might say. The last thing she needs is for old, painful memories to be dredged up by something unfortunate, like a misplaced piece of personal property. His client, Carol. Of course, this was her cleaner. The person you call when you can't use a text message to solve your problems. The man who had likely been parked outside my house. Watching, waiting. The man who had followed me here. "This is evidence of a murder," I said, finding a sliver of courage in my anger. "You and your client are accessories." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Bold words. But evidence is a tricky thing. It can be lost. It can be corrupted. Computers, for example, are so fragile, aren't they? A little fall, a little water damage, and poof. It's all just meaningless data. The elevator chimed softly, and the doors slid open to reveal a dimly lit concrete parking garage. It was empty except for a single black sedan parked near the elevator doors. "My car is right here. Why don't you and I take a little ride? We can talk this through, come to an arrangement that benefits everyone." He took a step towards me. My mind raced. He wasn't going to physically attack me here, not with cameras likely watching the elevator bay. He was trying to intimidate me, to herd me into that car where there would be no witnesses. Once those doors closed, I would disappear. I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. Not a damsel in distress shriek, but a raw guttural roar of fury and grief that seemed to tear itself from my soul. I threw the laptop. Not at him, but away from him, down the long, empty lane of the parking garage. It skidded across the grimy concrete with a horrible scraping sound, coming to rest near a concrete pillar 20 yards away. The man was momentarily stunned by my outburst, his professional calm cracking for just a second. That second was all I needed. I didn't run for the laptop. I ran for the stairs. I slammed my hand on the emergency exit bar and burst through the door, my footsteps echoing in the concrete stairwell as I scrambled upwards. "Bad decision, Sarah!" he yelled from behind me, his own footsteps starting to pound up the stairs in pursuit. I flew up the flights, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get out, get to a public place, get somewhere with people. I burst out onto the ground floor, into a deserted hallway near the hospital's administrative offices. It was after hours. The hallway was empty. I could hear his footsteps closing in. I saw a door labeled janitorial, and without thinking, wrenched it open and dove inside, pulling it shut behind me. I plunged into darkness, the air thick with the smell of bleach and old mops. I held my breath, pressing my ear against the cold metal of the door, listening. I heard his footsteps slow, then stop. Right outside the closet. My heart felt like it was going to explode. He was going to find me. He would open the door and it would all be over. I heard the squeak of his polished shoes on the linoleum. He was pacing. Then I heard his phone ring. "Yes?" he answered, his voice a low growl. He was so close I could hear his every word. "No, I don't have it yet. She's resourceful." There was a pause. I could hear the faint, tinny sound of Carol's voice on the other end of the line. "The police? Don't be ridiculous. She won't talk. She's scared. She knows what's at stake." Another pause. "I'll handle it. I'll get the laptop and I will find her. Just get the boy on a plane. The sooner he's out of the country, the better for everyone." Mark. They were sending Mark away. They were tying up all the loose ends. Me, the laptop, and the murderer himself. I heard him sigh in frustration. Look, Carol, your son is a liability. He left a video recording of himself committing a felony. He's an idiot. My job is to clean up his mess. Now let me do it. He hung up. His footsteps receded down the hall. I waited, not daring to breathe for what felt like an eternity. Finally, when I was sure he was gone, I slowly, carefully, pushed the door open a crack. The hallway was empty. He had gone back to the garage to retrieve the laptop. This was my chance. I had to get out of the hospital, but I couldn't leave without the laptop. As long as it existed, I had leverage. As long as it existed, David's murder wouldn't be in vain. I crept out of the closet and back towards the stairwell. I had to get back to the garage, get the laptop, and get to my car before he did. I took the stairs back down, my movements slow and silent. I peered through the small wire-meshed window in the stairwell door. I could see the man. He was standing by the pillar, the laptop case in his hand. He was on the phone again, his back to me. My car was parked 2 rows over. If I was quiet, I might be able to get to it without him noticing. But what good was my car without the evidence? I had to get the laptop. I watched him, my mind racing, trying to formulate a plan. And then I saw it. The fire alarm. A small red box on the wall of the parking garage right next to the stairwell door. It was a crazy idea. A desperate, stupid movie plot idea. But it was the only one I had. I took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and pulled the alarm. The effect was instantaneous. A deafening klaxon began to blare, and bright strobe lights started flashing, bathing the dim garage in a frantic, pulsating red light. The man whipped around, startled, his eyes wide in the strobing light. He saw me. For a moment, we just stared at each other from across the garage. 2 actors in a silent, flashing drama. Then he started running towards me. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, not towards my car, but deeper into the garage, weaving between the parked cars. The alarm was a disorienting cacophony, the flashing lights making it hard to see. I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was still coming, dodging cars, gaining on me. I rounded a corner and saw a ramp leading up to the next level. I scrambled up it, my shoes slipping on the smooth concrete. I reached the next level and kept running, the alarm still screaming below me. And then I saw him. He hadn't followed me up the ramp. He had gone back to his car. The black sedan's engine roared to life, its headlights cutting through the dimness. He was going to cut me off, to trap me on this level. I ran to the edge of the parking garage, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I was on the 2nd floor looking down at the street below. There was nowhere else to run. The sedan screeched around the corner at the top of the ramp, its tires smoking, and sped towards me. I was trapped. The headlights pinned me against the low concrete barrier like a terrified animal. He wasn't going to just take the laptop. He was going to make this look like an accident. A distraught woman, grieving her father-in-law's death, tragically takes her own life. It was the perfect ending to their perfect story. The car barreled towards me. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact. This was it. This was the end. But in that split second, a thought, clear as a bell, cut through my panic. Computers are so fragile. That's what he'd said. As the car's bumper was just feet away, I opened my eyes, opened the laptop case, and with every ounce of strength I had left, I hurled the laptop, not at the car, but up and over the side of the parking garage. It arced through the air for a moment, a dark silhouette against the strobing red lights, and then it smashed onto the asphalt street 2 stories below, exploding in a shower of plastic and metal. The sedan screeched to a halt just inches from my body. The man stared at me through the windshield, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. And in his eyes, I saw something new. I had not just destroyed a piece of evidence. I had signed my own death warrant. He slowly put the car in park, his knuckles white on the gear shift. The driver's side door clicked open. The click of the car door opening was the loudest sound in the world, louder even than the klaxon that still blared through the parking garage. Time seemed to slow down. I was acutely aware of everything. The smell of burning rubber, the heat radiating from the car's engine, the pulsating red light painting the man's face in demonic flashes as he stepped out of the vehicle. His mask of professional calm was gone, replaced by a cold, reptilian fury. He had failed. I had taken away his prize, and now all that was left was tying up the loose end, me. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said, his voice dangerously low as he advanced on me. But something inside me had snapped. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was being eclipsed by a white-hot rage. Rage for David, for the 7 years stolen from him, for the final brutal end he'd met. Rage for myself, for the life that had been a lie. "I know exactly what I did," I spat back, my voice shaking but defiant. "I destroyed your only copy." He stopped, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Only copy?" My mind was racing faster than it ever had before. I was cornered, outmatched, but I had one weapon left: information. He thought the laptop was everything. He didn't know what I knew. "You think Mark is an idiot for making the video," I said, bluffing, praying my voice wouldn't betray the terror I felt. "But he's not stupid enough to keep the only copy on a 7-year-old laptop. That video? It's in the cloud. It's on a dozen servers. I sent copies to my lawyer and a journalist I trust this afternoon. There are fail-safes. Dead man's switches. If I don't check in every 12 hours, those files go public." The video, Mark's confession. Everything. It was a complete and utter lie. I hadn't had time to do any of that. The only copy was in 1,000 pieces on the street below. But he didn't know that. I saw the seed of doubt plant itself in his cold eyes. He was a professional. He dealt in risk assessment, in calculated moves. An unpredictable, grieving widow was one thing. A woman who had methodically prepared for this, who had contingency plans, was another thing entirely. "You're lying," he said, but the conviction was gone from his voice. "Am I?" I took a tiny step away from the ledge towards the stairwell. "Kill me. Go ahead. All you'll do is trigger the release. You'll be trading one problem for a much, much bigger one. Carol and Mark will go down, and you'll be right there with them. Accessory to murder. Conspiracy. Your picture will be on every news channel by morning." We were at a stalemate, the flashing red lights illuminating our silent standoff. The blaring alarm was starting to attract attention. I could hear distant shouts, the sound of approaching sirens. The fire department was on its way. He knew his window of opportunity was closing. He had to make a choice. Call my bluff and eliminate me, risking a media firestorm, or retreat and reassess. For a long, agonizing moment, he just stared at me. I could see the calculation in his eyes. Then, with a look of pure hatred, he slowly backed away, got into his car, and put it in reverse. He backed down the ramp, his tires squealing in protest, and disappeared into the depths of the garage. The sirens were getting closer. I was safe, for now. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the grimy concrete, my body trembling with adrenaline and relief. I had survived. I had stared into the face of the monster, and I had made him blink. But as the first fire truck pulled up to the hospital entrance below, a new, chilling realization dawned on me. My lie had saved me, but it had also trapped me. I now had to create the dead man's switch. I had to make the lie a reality. I stumbled to my car, my mind a whirlwind of plans. I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. This man, Carol's cleaner, had shown me how powerful and far-reaching they were. They could have people everywhere. I couldn't trust anyone. I drove away from the hospital, away from the flashing lights and the wreckage of the laptop on the street. I didn't go home. My home wasn't safe. No place connected to me was safe. I drove to a 24-hour electronics store and, using cash, bought a cheap, untraceable burner phone and a handful of encrypted USB drives. Then I went to an all-night diner, sat in a back booth, and used their public Wi-Fi to begin. I opened a dozen anonymous email accounts. I created accounts on cloud storage services based in countries with no extradition treaties. I began to write. I wrote everything. I detailed the last 7 years. The hospital visits. The quiet moments of suspicion I had ignored. I wrote about David waking up. His terrible accusation. I described the Kiev video in excruciating detail. The argument, the shove, the horrifying smile on Mark's face. I described Carol's visit to the hospital, the man in the elevator, the chase in the parking garage. It was a digital confession, a last will and testament, a declaration of war. I saved the document, encrypted it, and uploaded it to every cloud service I could find. Then I set up the dead man switch. I used a complex system of timed emails and automated posts. I scheduled them to go out in 24 hours. A dozen emails to a dozen different major news outlets. Posts on social media, on Reddit, on every platform I could think of. The only thing that would stop the flood was a code, a specific phrase I would have to enter manually within the next 24 hours. If I didn't, or couldn't, my story would blanket the internet. It was almost dawn when I finished. I was exhausted, running on nothing but caffeine and pure, unadulterated rage. I had the leverage I needed, but what was the next step? I couldn't hide forever. My goal wasn't just to save myself, it was to get justice for David. And for that, I needed incontrovertible proof. The video was gone. My testimony was just the word of a grieving, hysterical woman against a wealthy, powerful family. I needed something more. I needed a confession. And I knew exactly how to get it. Mark. They were sending him out of the country. To hide him. To protect him. He would be scared, paranoid, cut off from his mother and her handler. He was the weak link. He was the idiot who filmed himself committing a murder. If I could get to him. If I could get him to talk. But how? I had no idea where he was. He was on a _9_vacation. Carol's cleaner had said to get him on a plane. He was on the move. I scrolled through the contacts on my real phone, which I'd been afraid to turn on. His friends. The ones he'd gone on the trip with, Greg and Peter. Maybe they knew something. It was a long shot, but it was the only one I had. I used the burner phone to call Greg. It was just after 6 a.m. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. Hello? Greg, it's Sarah, I said, my voice low and urgent. Sarah? What's wrong? Is everything okay? It's the middle of the... I need to find Mark. I cut him off. It's an emergency. His father, he's had a turn for the worse. It was a cruel lie, but a necessary one. Oh man, I'm so sorry, Greg said, suddenly wide awake. But we're not with him. He left yesterday afternoon. My heart sank. What? What do you mean he left? Where did he go? It was weird, man. Greg said. He got a message on one of those satellite text things. Said it was a family emergency and he had to leave immediately. Said his mom was sending a car to pick him up at the trailhead. We haven't heard from him since. A satellite text. A private car. Carol was moving him like a chess piece, keeping him isolated. But Greg's next word sent a jolt of electricity through me. He seemed really spooked. Left in a huge hurry. He even left his wallet and his regular phone behind. Said he didn't have time. The only thing he took was his passport, his wallet, and his phone. They were still at the cabin. A cabin in the middle of nowhere. A cabin that likely had a security system. A system that Mark, being the tech-savvy person he was, had probably linked to an online account, an account that stored footage in the cloud. The video might be gone. But what if there was another one? The cabin. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble based on a series of assumptions, but it was the only lead I had. I knew the general area Mark and his friends went to every year, a remote stretch of national forest about a 4-hour drive north. Finding the exact cabin would be the first hurdle. "Greg, I need the location of the cabin," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The police need to get in touch with him about his father, and his phone is off." "I need the address." There was a moment's hesitation on the other end of the line. Greg was a loyal friend to Mark. "I don't know, Sarah. Mark is really private about that place. He calls it his off-the-grid sanctuary. I'm not sure I should—" "Greg, listen to me, Uksa," I interrupted, my voice dropping to an urgent, conspiratorial whisper. "Something is very wrong. Carol is not telling me the whole truth about David. Mark is in some kind of trouble, and I think his mother is trying to control the situation. He left his phone and wallet? That doesn't sound like Mark. I'm worried about him." I was planting seeds of doubt, using his friendship with Mark against him. I could hear him thinking, processing. The story of a controlling mother-in-law was far more believable than the monstrous truth. "Okay," he finally said, his voice low. "Okay, you're right. That was weird. I'll text you the coordinates." "But Sarah, be careful." "I will," I promised, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. As soon as he hung up, a text came through with a pin drop location. I plugged it into my phone's GPS. 4 hours and 23 minutes. I got back in my car, my body screaming for sleep, but my mind was a live wire. I had a little over 16 hours left on my dead man switch. The clock was ticking. The drive was a grueling test of endurance. I mainlined gas station coffee and forced myself to stay alert, my eyes constantly scanning the rearview mirror, even though I knew Carol's man was likely focused on damage control in the city, not chasing me into the wilderness. The urban sprawl slowly melted away, replaced by rolling hills, then dense forests. The roads became narrower, more winding, until finally, my GPS told me to turn onto a long, unpaved gravel road. After another 20 minutes of bouncing and rattling, I saw it. Tucked into a clearing was a modern-looking cabin, all dark wood and large glass windows. It looked serene and peaceful, a stark contrast to the ugly secret it might be hiding. I parked my car down the road, out of sight, and approached on foot, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. As I got closer, I saw the security cameras. 2 of them, small black domes tucked under the eaves, one pointed at the front door, the other covering the driveway. This was it. Mark's love of technology, his paranoia about his sanctuary, might just be his undoing. Now for the hard part, getting inside. I circled the cabin, looking for a weak point. The windows were all new, securely locked. The back door was solid. The front door had a keypad lock. I had no idea what the code could be. I tried the obvious, birthdays, anniversaries, but nothing worked. I was about to give up and break a window when I saw the fake rock next to the front steps. It was a cliché, but Mark, for all his tech savviness, had a sentimental, predictable streak. I picked it up. Taped to the bottom was a spare key. I almost laughed. After everything, it was a simple, stupid mistake that would bring him down. I unlocked the door and slipped inside, my senses on high alert. The air was still and smelled of pine and cold ashes from the fireplace. The main room was messy, clear evidence of a hasty departure. Beer bottles on the coffee table, a half-eaten bag of chips, and on the kitchen counter. There they were, Mark's wallet and his phone. I ignored them for now. My priority was the security system. I found the main hub in a utility closet. It was a standard, off-the-shelf brand. I recognized the logo. I took out my burner phone and searched for the company's name. Just as I'd hoped, they offered cloud storage for their footage. Now I just needed to access the account. I went back to Mark's phone. It was locked, of course. But I didn't need to get into the phone itself. I just needed the number. I popped out the SIM card and put it into my burner. I went to the security company's website and clicked Forgot Password. I entered Mark's phone number. A second later, a text message with a password reset link arrived on the burner. I felt a surge of triumph. I was in. I logged into the account on my own phone and navigated to the archived footage. The timeline went back months. I scrolled to yesterday's date. There were dozens of clips triggered by motion. The boys arriving, them unloading the truck, them sitting on the porch drinking beer. My finger trembled as I scrolled through the thumbnails. And then I found it. A clip from yesterday afternoon. Timestamped 3:47 p.m. The thumbnail showed Mark standing on the porch, alone, looking at something in his hand. This was it. This had to be when he got the satellite message. I took a deep breath and pressed play. The video was crystal clear, the audio sharp. Mark walked onto the porch holding a small black satellite messaging device. His face was tense. He typed a message, then waited. A moment later, the device buzzed. He read the reply, and I watched as all the color drained from his face. He stumbled back, catching himself on the porch railing. He looked utterly terrified. He started pacing, muttering to himself. The camera's microphone was sensitive enough to pick it up. "Woke up! How? No! No, no, no!" He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes wide with panic. "She's lying! She has to be lying!" The device buzzed again. He read the new message, and his shoulders slumped in defeat. He walked to the edge of the porch, staring out into the woods, his back to the camera. He was perfectly still for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice clear and filled with a chilling self-pity. "I had to do it," he whispered to the empty forest. "He was going to ruin everything. He was never going to give it to me. 7 years I've lived with this. I thought I was free." He let out a choked, bitter laugh. "And now he's awake. It's all for nothing. It was there." A confession, caught on his own camera. It wasn't as dramatic as the first video, but it was just as damning. He admitted it. I had him. I quickly downloaded the file to my phone, my hands shaking with relief. I immediately uploaded it to my network of cloud accounts, another piece of insurance, another nail in his coffin. I felt a giddy sense of victory. I had done it. I had the proof I needed. I could walk out of this cabin, let the dead man's switch expire, and the world would know what Mark and Carol had done. Justice for David was finally within reach. I was about to leave when a thought occurred to me. The satellite messenger. What messages had he received? Who was he talking to? It had to be his mother. Seeing the actual conversation could make the case even stronger. I looked around the messy cabin. Where would he have put it? He was in a panic. He wouldn't have hidden it carefully. I spotted his duffel bag, lying open on the floor by the couch. I knelt and started rummaging through it. Dirty clothes, a book, toiletries. And there, at the bottom, was the small black device. I picked it up and turned it on. The screen lit up, displaying the message history. The conversation was there between Mark and an unknown user, but it was clearly Carol. Carol. He's awake. Mark. What? How? Are you sure? Carol. The hospital called. He woke up an hour ago. He's talking. Mark. What did he say? Did he say my name? Carol. I don't know yet. They won't tell me anything over the phone. I'm on my way there now. You need to leave. Now. Get rid of your phone. A car will meet you at the trailhead in 2 hours. Don't talk to anyone. Asterisk, I scrolled down, expecting to see more instructions, more panicked exchanges. But the next message wasn't from Carol. It was from Mark. sent just a few minutes before he left the cabin. It was a reply, but not to his mother. He had started a new conversation with a different contact, a contact labeled simply J, and the message he sent made my blood run cold, erasing all my victory, all my relief, and replacing it with a new, more profound, and sickening horror. It was one short sentence, a sentence that recontextualized everything I thought I knew, a sentence that told me this conspiracy went deeper than I could ever have imagined. The message read, "She knows. Plan B is a go. She knows. Plan B is a go." The words on the small screen seemed to rearrange the entire universe. Who was Jay? And what in God's name was Plan B? The cleaner in the garage hadn't been Plan B. Carol silencing David hadn't been Plan B. Those were panicked, reactive moves. This was something different. Something premeditated, a contingency. My blood ran cold as I realized the horrifying truth. David waking up wasn't the worst-case scenario they had prepared for. I was. My mind reeled back to the first text message I'd received. He knows? I had assumed it was from Carol, a warning to me, but it wasn't. It was from this Jay, a message to Carol, letting her know David was awake. And the text I'd gotten later, the photo of the hospital, it wasn't a threat to me. It was intel for their team. I had been so focused on Mark and Carol that I had failed to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just a panicked mother protecting her murderous son. This was an organized, well-oiled machine, and I had just walked right into the heart of it. The cabin, Mark's off-the-grid sanctuary, suddenly felt like the most dangerous place on earth. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a trap. Greg hadn't just given me the coordinates, he had been instructed to. They had led me here. They knew I would look for proof, that I would find the security footage. They had baited the hook, and I had swallowed it whole. My stomach churned. I had to get out. I shoved the satellite device into my pocket, grabbed Mark's phone and wallet from the counter, and ran for the door. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I burst out into the cold mountain air, sprinting for the tree line where I'd hidden my car. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounded like an approaching footstep. The remote silence of the forest was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, and threw myself inside, locking the doors. My hands were shaking so badly, it took me 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. The engine turned over, and I slammed the car into reverse, spinning gravel as I peeled out onto the narrow dirt road. I didn't know who Jay was, but I knew I was in a race against a clock I couldn't see. My dead man switch was set to go off in a few hours, but I had a chilling certainty that Plan B would unfold long before then. I careened down the winding road, my focus absolute. My phone, my real phone, buzzed in the passenger seat. An unknown number. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Whoever it was, they were persistent. On the 5th call, a primal instinct screamed at me to answer. I jammed the speakerphone button. "You're a very difficult woman to get in touch with, Sarah." It was him. The man from the elevator. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but the underlying menace was unmistakable. "What do you want?" I snapped, my eyes darting between the road and my rearview mirror. "What I want," he said smoothly, "is for you to pull over and stop being so dramatic. We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about." "Oh, I think we do. We need to talk about Plan B." You see, Carol was always the sentimentalist. She believed Mark could be managed, that the secret could be contained. I, on the other hand, have always believed in preparing for the inevitable. Mark is a fool. It was inevitable he'd leave a trail. And you, my dear, are far more resourceful than anyone gave you credit for. It was inevitable you'd find it. "Who are you?" I demanded. He let out that same dry, humorless chuckle. "Let's just say I'm a silent partner." the J in Mark's phone. My name is Julian, and I've been cleaning up David's family's messes for a very long time. Your father-in-law, for all his business acumen, had a penchant for making very powerful enemies. I made them go away. When his own son became his biggest liability, my role simply evolved. It all clicked into place. The business deals David had shut down, his distrust of Mark's abilities. It wasn't just about family drama. It was about crime. Julian was the real power behind the throne, using the family business for his own illicit purposes. David had found out. That was the real argument on that hiking trail. The inheritance was just the excuse. And when David was out of the picture, Julian had latched onto his new puppet, Mark. Plan B, Sarah, Julian continued, his voice hardening, is very simple. When a piece of machinery is broken beyond repair, you scrap it. Mark is broken. He's a loose end, a liability who knows far too much about my operations. And you, unfortunately, are attached to him. The narrative has already been written. A tragic story. A young man, overcome with guilt and grief over his father's death, takes his wife to a remote cabin and ends both their lives. A murder-suicide. So sad. So clean. A wave of absolute terror washed over me. The confession video I'd found wasn't for the police. It was for this. It was Mark's suicide note. They had led me here to die, to become the final tragic chapter in their perfectly crafted story. It's too late, I said, my voice trembling. My dead man's switch goes off in 3 hours. The whole world will know. 3 hours is a lifetime. Sarah, and your switch depends on an internet connection. Do you have any idea how easy it is to knock out a few cell towers in a remote area like this? By the time your story gets out, if it ever does, we'll be ghosts. The money will be gone, the company a hollow shell, and you'll just be a sad headline. I glanced at my phone. The signal bars were dropping. One by one, they disappeared until the dreaded no service message appeared. He had cut me off. I was alone. I saw a flash of headlights in my rearview mirror. A black sedan, just like the one from the garage, was closing in fast. My mind raced. He was going to run me off the road, make it look like an accident. I floored the accelerator, the little car groaning in protest as it flew down the gravel road. But the sedan was too fast, too powerful. It was gaining on me. I had one last desperate card to play. The satellite messenger. I fumbled in my pocket for the device, my eyes flicking between the road ahead and the rapidly approaching car behind me. I turned it on, my fingers flying across the tiny keypad. I didn't have time for a long message. I pulled up my pre-planned contact, the journalist I'd lied about contacting earlier, but whose contact info I had saved for just this possibility. I typed a frantic, abbreviated message. Mark Miller killed David Miller. Julian, no last name, is accomplice. Proof in cloud. Dead man, switch armed. They're trying to kill me. GPS cords attached. I hit send just as the sedan slammed into my rear bumper. My car fishtailed wildly, the world outside becoming a blur of green and brown. The message status read, sending. The sedan hit me again, harder this time, and my head slammed against the side window. Black spots danced in my vision. I fought for control of the car, but it was useless. A third impact sent the car spinning off the road, down an embankment, crashing through a curtain of trees, and coming to a violent final stop as it slammed into a massive oak. The world went silent, save for the ticking of the cooling engine and the faint chime of the satellite device on the floor. The message status now read, sent. Then, darkness. I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the gentle rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. For a terrifying second, I thought I was back in David's room, that I was the one in the coma. I forced my eyes open. The light was soft. I was in a hospital room. My head was bandaged and my arm was in a cast, but I was alive. A woman in a police uniform was sitting in a chair by my bed. She smiled when she saw my eyes were open. "Welcome back, Sarah. You gave us quite a scare." "What? What happened?" I whispered, my throat raw. "You were in a car accident," she said. "But I have a feeling you know that. We were alerted by a text message from a journalist at the New York Times. Sent him your GPS coordinates. The first responders found you just in time. The car was rigged to go up in flames. They found traces of accelerant all over the engine. My message had gotten through." "Julian?" I rasped. "Mark? Carol?" The officer's smile became grim. "Julian Croft is in federal custody. It seems your little dead man switch worked perfectly. Once. We had your story and Mark's confession from the cloud. It didn't take long for his whole criminal enterprise to unravel. Carol Miller was arrested this morning, an accessory to murder and a dozen other things. She's talking, trying to cut a deal." A wave of relief so profound it felt like a physical weight lifted from my chest. David had justice. They hadn't gotten away with it. "And Mark?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "That's the complicated part," she said, her expression softening with something like pity. "We tracked him to a private airfield outside of town. He was about to board a plane to Costa Rica, but he never made it." She paused. Julian's plan B was thorough. He couldn't risk Mark talking. Not to us. Not to anyone. The car that picked him up at the trailhead, it wasn't sent by his mother. It was sent by Julian. Mark was dead before you even got to the cabin. Julian's men made it look like a suicide. Your video confession became his suicide note just as he planned. I closed my eyes, a silent tear tracing a path through the grime on my cheek. It was a brutal, ugly end. Mark hadn't escaped justice. He had been consumed by the very evil he had aligned himself with. There was no victory in it, only a deep, profound sadness for the man I thought I had married, and the man he had become. Months have passed. I've healed. Physically, at least. The trials are over. Carol will spend the rest of her life in prison. Julian's empire has been dismantled. The money I inherited from David, his entire fortune, which passed to Mark and then to me upon his death. I've used to start a foundation in David's name, helping victims of violent crime. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I think about that final moment on the hiking trail, the shove, the betrayal. And I realize that on that day, 2 men died. My father-in-law fell into a coma, and my husband fell into a darkness from which he would never return. It took 7 years for the story to end, but now, finally, they can both rest in peace. And I, the woman who loved them both, can finally begin to live again.